It was at the Magic Academy of the Guldana Kingdom, which had a prestigious history record which was of many floors in the royal capital dungeon by their students. There was a legendary party who had their record unbroken which was called the Lasting Period, and belonged to the 60-80th floor. At the Guldana Kingdom, royal capital dungeon, a boy was walking through the misty swamps on the 29th floor looking for the affinity for magic water to walk through. He then reaches ahead to get some weapon for himself but wonders what they would think and then recalls an incident that had seemingly been 4 years from the date. He then approaches Odd to acquire the weapon and then he recalls at the court wizard Alec Yugret how 3 people are around him and the prince, calling him out saying he has something to talk about. The boy addresses him as Highness Regulus and asks upon if he wants to talk about the dungeon. The prince then interrupts his talk and asks him what his task is and asks whether he had fulfilled his task before in the battle. The principal then states that all of the others have contributed their parts such as the prince wielding his sword accompanied by Lenny, who used her flame magic, and then Ikus, who endured it for them. The prince then points him out that he did nothing but just use his support magic and concludes that he wasn't worthy of acquiring the title of Count Wizard. Yugret and the prince start to argue when the prince is against him due to his cowardliness. The prince then asks Yugret as to what he is carrying and then Yugret reveals he bought a short sword as he thought he would use it if it was handy in any situation the floors. The prince then yells out saying that he wasn't allowed to carry any weapons and spots him out for his egoistic actions and pulls him by his cape collar. He then lays his eyes on the robe and pulls it off from Yugret's neck, saying that he would own it from now, and insults him before he says he is leaving to conquer the 30th floor and that he was now fired by the day after saying he was a useless wizard in his party. Yugret then sits in a room and where starts to write about the floor which he is about to visit the next day and remembers how the crown prince commanded him all the time thinking of this. He believes that the prince would change his mind after he reads the counter strategy Yugret wrote about which was upon the dungeon, which wants to be underestimated. As Yugret went to meet the crown prince, the guards spot him at the doors, insulting Yugret that a commoner like him wouldn't be allowed without the permission which surprises him. Yugret then thinks as to why they were calling him ordinary despite his belonging as the court wizard. Yugret then calls himself the court wizard and seeks entry and behind him is Lenny, who asks him whether he has something to take from the castle. Yugret then asks Lenny to explain the guards to which she interrupts him saying that he was stripped of his rights stating he was not the court wizard anymore which leaves him shocked. He then pleads to her to hand over the strategy he made to give it over to the Majesty, King Ferox saying that he was ordered to join the Highness Regulus party. She then takes the papers from his hands, rips them apart, and calls out the guards to throw him away. Yugret then returns to the town thinking of how he did much as a court wizard after graduating from the academy by 4 years. He then claims to prove his worth. He then reaches the place where he recalls his past moments on how they used to play on the stairs even during the graduation ceremony. It was the Royal Magic Academy, where he heard a voice calling out his name and it was Yoruha, who ran towards him and hugged him tight as she was surprised to see him after a long time. Yugret asks as to what she was doing there at the royal capital to which she said she was transferring carriages all along here. She then reminds him of the things she said Yugret at the time of graduation which was about meeting someday after parting off to their journey. Yoruha then calls Yugret to come along with her asking him to be an adventurer as they were getting together at a party again. She then remembers that he was a court wizard to which Yugret rejects her call saying she would find someone who would be better than him. After which Yoruha learns he got fired listening to which Yoruha was mad about how people treated him. She then says about their visit they had to the 68th floor along with the boss Hydra was their last challenge where they gathered all the items and the 4 of them marched to the door of unknown where they ended up fighting a monster hidden in the castle with all their powers. The members of their party had Ernest Rain ranked 4th, followed by Classy Ann Rose at 3rd place. Second being your Izens, and finally him, Alec Yugret at the 1st rank. Yoruha then states they would now start a brand new legacy where they would continue being the team for an everlasting period. Yoruha and Yugret travel to form back the legendary group and reach the Labyrinth City Diesel, where there were all the adventurers around. Yoruha states that this was a good city where there wasn't any prejudice against adventurers as 3 of them have been living there in the city, and tells Yugret that they are going to enter the dungeon in the western runs, and then tells him that they need to first get Yugret to register in the guild and she is so excited about the adventure being starting from today. They then reach the Feasel Adventurers Guild, where at the moment Yugret shows his application to register, he is rejected saying that he can't be allowed to enter the depths of the dungeon. Yoruha then gets tensed and asks her, Misha, to do something to help them out and she tells them to come back again later as these were the rules to be followed. Yugret then asks Misha what a pass is for to which she explains how he needs to get a license to enter the dungeons with more than 30 floors and that Feasel would be granted to those who have been in the guild for at least 2 years. Yoruha then reminds Misha that Classy visited her and spoke about the past and then Misha tells her that she just told her not to say anything. and to give him listen to this. Yorua was annoyed about how she left this matter to Classy and says they could not wait for such long of 2 years. She then tells Yugret that they would start with one that they can enter now as he didn't need the pass for lower levels. Yugret and Yorua then reach the Feasel Central Dungeon and proceed to the second floor Shady Forest, where they both fight against the enemies using their magic powers. They continued fighting all the creatures ahead of them despite them attacking. The numbers still kept increasing. Yorua then plans to take up the situation all alone, which Yugret holds her back as he is concerned. Yorua then assures that she could use a defensive wall which was strong as an iron wall, and that they were a team, which reminds her of the past days of Yugret. It was the time when Yugret was yelling at the prince not to go alone, after which he planned to pick up the route that had all the dangers eliminated all along. He then realizes that he isn't any court mage now and strikes down all the creatures with his magic. Seeing this, you are impressed seeing the Yugret back as how he was in the past and appreciate him for being such a best wizard. The ground starts to tremble and the huge creature comes out, raising Yorua along with it. Yugret then learns that this might be responsible for getting all the winged creatures' behavior altered. He then strikes the creature using all his magic power. They then return to the city where Yorua is so happy that she treats Yugret with drinks, after which she passes out after having alcohol. A man then approaches Yugret and starts to pick up with him, which Yugret ignores, which makes the man mad, and he strikes over Yugret, but he is left unharmed due to the shield covering him. The man then was gazing at Yugret, calling him to be the image of the Guldana court before asking if he changed later, hands over a card as a part of his apology to him for spilling alcohol on him, and instead asks Yugret to show his magic to him. The man asks Yugret to show his magic to him, tempting him by showing the pass he had. Yugret then tries waking up Yorua, and after that she calls the man in front of her as guild master, leaving Yugret surprised. Yorua then asks what he was doing there. They were then taken to the Feasel Adventurers Guild, where the guild master took them to the guild's subterranean arena. He then introduces himself officially as Level Stance, the guild master of Feasel's guild. He then states all the rules which were to test the skills they both had, saying Yugret to catch up with Yorua and others from the guild. Level then prepares to battle against Yugret and questions whether he is also an expert, as he belonged to the magicians of Galdana's court. Yugret then remembers about Level being an amazing wizard who led an S-ranked group about 10 years ago, who still had the capability to cut above a lot of mages. Yugret makes the first move to attack him, where he attacks Level by using the tactics to get ahead of him and attack him by throwing the support boosting magic. Level then surpasses the power of magic Yugret uses, which leaves him shocked, and he then gets punched in his face, leaving him flying all along the room. Level then appreciates Yugret as to how he managed to block his attack by a shield. Yugret then learns that Level is much stronger than himself, as he was a S-ranked adventurer. He then thinks of other options as to how he could resist his attacks further, as he couldn't use the shield again, and plans to dodge his next attack. But later he recalls how he was taunted by holding a weapon, being a commoner, by the crown prince. Then he pulls out the magic swords, leaving those words behind, and attacks Level. They both continue to battle, where Level appreciates Yugret for his attacks and challenges him so he can block his fist. Yugret then observes how Level is attacking and decides to aim for the spot he would throw against him. The fight ends with a bright flash of light wherein Yugret was successful in blocking Level's attack. Level then smiles and is impressed at how Yugret has managed to break through his magic in such a short time, saying which, he pulls out his ancient relic challenging Yugret, and says this would be the point where his journey would start from now. The ancient relic owned by Level was an incredible weapon that had magic power, which in turn made the person bearing it stronger. Level then jumps swiftly, attacking Yugret, which he dodges but finds a massive wreck in the floor caused due to the punch Level threw by his relic. This stunned Yugret as he learned how powerful the relic was, which shattered the stone floor as a piece of wood. Level then grins at Yugret and challenges him to get scared only by seeing such a thing, and then he continues attacking Yugret, who continues to dodge the attacks. Level yells at Yugret, saying he will not be able to pass the test until he keeps running away, which then bothers Yorua, seeing Yugret in such a dangerous situation. Yorua then thinks upon the weapon possessed by Level, which was his favorite dragnet, as a solid weapon that excelled in both offense and defiance, and also granted the special ability that had a magical healing effect despite as long as the battle went up until the worst situation. Yugret then grows furious after seeing that Level had no damage despite his attacks, and then Level yells out at Yugret, saying that he would soon recover fast if he doesn't try harder to attack him. Yugret then learns that he wouldn't be affected no matter how many times he tried to attack him, and plans to attack him with the great magic at the range, but then thinks upon how much mana would be left within him to throw a tough attack to Level. He then recalls the past pathetic days he passed when he was at the academy, where he kept fighting for days and spent all his rest time inside the dungeon, and then smiles thinking upon that he would start to train again. Seeing this, Leviel grows mad asking as to why he is smiling, and then Yugret throws a punch, leaving Leviel wounded. Leviel then aggressively throws a strong attack at Yugret which he manages to block by using the shield, which excites Yorua as she figures out that Yugret was waiting for the moment to use the shield against him. Yugret then attacks Leviel in his torso, leaving him groaning in pain. As Yugret is about to throw the last attack, his wand breaks, after which he falls off unconscious to the ground as he reaches his limit. The guildmaster then points out talking about the encounter he had with Yugret to Yorua, and then a man interrupts him calling as to what took him such long, asking as to what he was doing, something which he seemed interested in. He then picks upon Leviel saying that he went such extent and that he deserved it, to which Leviel calls he was being noisy, and then says he could take the pass or whatever he wanted. The man then approaches Yugret, who is still unconscious, and tells him that he won the match against Leviel with a wide grin on his face. The man then greets Yorua and states that he would have joined instead of her if he had been a step ahead of her, to which Yorua is annoyed and says that he was the one who failed miserably in the skill test, and that it had nothing to do with her. Leviel then makes fun of the man, to which the man states he was still actively clenching his fist as to give a lesson to the guildmaster. Yorua then holds him back, trying not to get the guildmaster attacked by him. Yugret was then treated by the healer, who was then left in the room to rest for a while. The man was impressed to see how Yugret became an adventurer. He then asks Yorua as to how she convinced him to come here, to which she says it was nothing she did and there were some things he faced when he was in court. Leviel then learns about the reason for the Gardenan's preference system for Chosen One, after which the man sighs, knowing that it wasn't the place where commoners like them couldn't walk freely, and talks as if he already figured out him getting crazy some other day. Leviel then wonders as to how it would have been a big deal for Yugret to hold himself for 4 years. The man was mad seeing Yoruba's expression and yelled at why she was making such a face, to which she said she was wondering the same thing as Leviel said. Then Leviel thinks about why Yugret kept being hard to stay at the court, to which the man says that he needed money. And then Yorua recalls how he said he was going to be a court magician to make his father live comfortably as he lost his mother due to an illness, and that his father too had a lot of problems, and ends up saying his goal was to earn money. A lady barges in the room shouting out for the guild master, stating that they had a problem. It was Misha, whom Yorua asks as to what has happened. She then tumbles, still calling out for the guild master. Leviel then picks her by the collar, telling Yorua that he has some work, and tells the man not to touch the liquor on the shelf. As Leviel leaves, the man pops out a bottle of liquor and then asks Yorua to tell them about the several things she mentioned that had happened to Yugret before. Yorua then narrates the whole story to him, after which he yells out upon learning that he was used as a guard for the crown princes, and was made to carry his swords and supplies all by himself when he wasn't allowed to use his magic skills he excelled in. Yorua then continues, telling that they even called him useless for using his support magic, which even bothered her too. They then recall how Yugret didn't use the magic since they were together, and then the man, who was Ernest, asks whether he might have learned it from scratch, which seemed amazing to Yorua as he possessed the defensive magic at a pretty high level. She then tells that he was even kicked out from the group, saying he wasn't needed anymore, which made Ernest furious, and he ended up cracking the window open. Yugret was now awake and asks as to what Ernest was doing there. He then asks Yorua as to where he was, then she says he got qualified in the test. Yugret is excited as he can go along with her to clear the dungeons together, to which Ernest disagrees and says they have many important things ahead instead. And he yells out upon taking revenge against the Gradient's court, and then they would visit the group of the prince to tear them apart. Yugret then tells Ernest to calm down, saying he does not care about it much. He then asks Yorua whether she is okay with her friend being treated as such, to which Yugret says he wants to enjoy the adventure much, which would leave the prince regretting him later. Ernest then points out at Yugret, yelling he needs to become the strongest of the world, and was waiting for Yugret to reject the prince sooner by becoming the world's best than the prince's escort. Leviel then asks whether he was referring to Crystal, who made it back safely, and says that he would be in trouble later along with his members, to which Ernest asks Leviel to help him. Leviel counts over the number of people and then asks Yugret whether he wants to participate. Crystal then asks if he is the Wizard of 5 Colors, and soon, Ernest is surprised to know Yugret. She then tells them about the incident where she had challenged the boss of the 60-80th floor at the dungeon in the royal city of Gardena, where she had the strategy to defeat him with different attributes on each of the 5 heads, which turned out to be thought as impossible but were performed by a person who was a magician nicknamed as 5 Colors. Leviel then learns that it was his name at the time he was at the academy, and suspects as to why his face wasn't of pride despite knowing it. Misha then calls Yugret, saying that the meeting has started. He then states that he had learned in the court to keep a low profile and to put a good face in all situations he faced without doing anything unnecessary. As Yugret is lost in his thoughts, Classic strikes Yugret's forehead by snap, startling Yugret, asking since when she was here, and she explains upon how his terrible expression made Misha sacred and to run away. She then figures out that Yugret wasn't looking well, and then she uses her healing magic, which makes him feel healed. Kasha then tells Yugret that he could talk to her when he has a hard time. Ernest seemed to be excited upon leaving the next morning for the adventure, which was a rescue mission given by their guild master. At the Feasel West dungeon, Ernest introduces it as the tank killer, where Yorua explains how they can't use any kind of healing magic and can only rely on potions. Yugret then turns towards Classy, wondering as to how he agreed to this, and she keeps an annoyed expression showing her objection over this idea. And yet Ernest decides out of his stupidity. There was a fight sparking between Classy and Ernest regarding the decision, and they started fighting against each other, seeing which, Yugret felt happy looking upon the feeling he missed. He then asks Yorua about Crystal's group who came back yesterday and whether they went to try to clean up the tank killer dungeon. And then she states about the S-ranked group of 4 members known refrain along with them, but later only Crystal managed to come back for help from the guild. Ernest was defeated by Classy, who fell on the ground and said that it would be useless to go help them normally, as it was the site which had a depth of 64 floors. Yugret then questions whether they needed a core, to which Yorua shows him the small marble, saying that they can avoid boss fights all the way along, and shows it to be an item for a deep dive they acquired from the 52nd floor crystal brought back, which would lead then to the shortcut to all the 64 floors at the same time. Yorua then explains that there were 2 cores which were for the guild's master and the selected members from the group, which was seemingly like the reward. Ernest then says that anyone could be the hindrance, as the strongest one becomes the strongest mage, and Yorua says that the guild master had allowed Yugret to use the core which was given to him as a reward, which surprises Yugret as he was selected one by the guild master. Ernest then assures them that they will make a mark on this world, which would not be something small like they were at the academy, and decides that the group would surprise everyone by being the team of a lasting period. They all reach the 64th floor, where Ernest is approaching through the dungeon by attacking all the enemies he is facing. Yugret then wonders about it being called the demon tank and says that they weren't needed at this point, as Ernest was clearing all the routes for them, and Classy thinks of the black piercing spear, which would be hard to break and pierce as it was just perfect for him, but that it was also an ancient realm. Yugret then calls out to Ernest asking if he needs some help, to which Ernest says he was enough to take down such of the junk all on his own. After clearing out the enemies, the 4 of the members sit down for supper, and they talk about the boss of the floor being a lethal ghost, to which Yorua talks about relying on Yugret to get the affinity, to which Ernest agrees and tells him to rest, as it wouldn't be good for him to run out of the magic at the crucial moment while fighting the boss. Kasha then agrees and tells Yugret to wait for their turn, saying that the dangerous area would start from here, as the area was where the S-ranked group was annihilated, which shocks Yugret. Then suspects something around and says he feels something strange around them, and he spots out an invisible enemy, and immediately Yugret pulls out his magic sword. Ernest then was impressed by seeing Yugret's skills and appreciated him, saying his skills were as persistent as they used to be. Yugret then yells out at Ernest as if he tricked him, but Ernest answers casually by saying that he heard of the invisible enemies, but didn't know how to deal with them, and was confident about Yugret that he could tackle something like this, which was a problem at all for him. Yugret then attacks the enemies ahead and is mad at how Ernest was trying to convince him to say such things, and turns towards Yorua asking whether she knew this way before, and then she apologizes to him, saying that she knew it in classic regret as to why she didn't agree to come upon to this dungeon before. Yugret then seems mad at Ernest, who then warns him that he will teach him a lesson when he gets him later. The 4 members were surrounded by the ghostly enemies, which seemingly was a trick to them as expected from the level of the floor. Ernest and Yugret move ahead swiftly to attack the enemies ahead to clear their way from the ghostly monsters. Ernest then asks Yugret why he was only using the thunderbolt, pointing out that he did the same way while fighting the guild master and reminding him of how he used to use all kinds of magic. Yugret then recalls the moments when he was with the prince, when he was yelling out at him saying he would take care of the enemies to protect the prince at any time. He then turns off his face, disagreeing to answer Ernest as to why he used only one kind of magic, which leaves Ernest to suspect Yugret as if he was hiding something from him, which Yugret assures that there was nothing. Suddenly, the floor begins to light up, and Yugret then that they are close enough to reach their floor. Ernest yells out excited as if he hit the jackpot, to which Yorua warns him not to do anything reckless, and then Ernest uses his boost spell and runs in the lightning speed, which surprises everyone as to how he used much power, and it would be unable to catch him by the speed he possessed. Yugret then talks about Yoruba's magic, and they then approach the gate when they encounter a man who seems sacred and is calling out for Ernest to save him, as is running towards them and seems to be feared by seeing something ahead as he is chased by a monster behind him. Ernest then looks as to who he was telling that he possessed much energy now, and tells Yugret that it was Loki Silveria, who pissed the monster which was there, and tells that he belonged to Rikopa. Loki then yells at Ernest, cussing him that he would remember what he was facing now. He then trips while getting chased by the monster behind him, which worries Yugret. Classy then says that the way Loki fought was good, as he was a trickster magician. As the monster is about to attack, Ernest saves him from the attack, pulling Loki away from it, and then Yugret decides to fight the monster ahead of him. It was the kingdom of Gardena, the dungeon of the royal capital on the 30th floor, where the monster was chasing the prince and his group. Where the prince yelled at Leni as to what she was doing and ordered her to cast a spell, then mumbled as to how her magic wasn't working at all and that she couldn't use her magic, which made the prince mad. The prince then pulls out his sword, saying that he would crush the monster by his skill, which in return makes the monster more furious and ends up attacking the prince, which leaves him unconscious. He then wakes up pretending that it isn't any problem against his defiance. He then feels his arm getting heavy by wielding the sword and blames Yugret, saying that it was due to Yugret that he was facing such a thing, and that he was cursed by him for kicking him out of their group, and cusses Yugret in anger, who was picked up by his teammates, who were running away from the monster, which was still chasing behind them. The monster then runs towards them and proceeds to attack Yugret, who then uses his magic skill of the shield, and as soon he is about to use the thunderbolt, the monster starts to flee against Yugret, who was going after Loki, carried by Ernest. Yugret then in an instant throws the thunderbolt and manages to attack it, which isn't sufficient enough to stop it, and it then raises, trying to catch it up. He then throws Loki at Classy and stands against the monster to fight it, but the monster still flies ahead of Ernest and continues to chase Loki, who is now with Classy. Ernest warns her to take Loki and run away from them. Ernest now holds upon the monster, where Yugret was ready to finish off the monster once Ernest attacks it. Europa uses her magic to support them, and Ernest manages to wound the monster. Loki is now awake and he encounters Ernest is fighting the monster along with Yugret, who is seemingly trying to draw the magic, which makes him dangerous in the eyes of Loki, as he was planning to make up much more magic deploys to fight the monster. Yugret then throws his thunderbolt attack of the multiple deployments, a special magic power by which Yogurt had managed to turn down the monster by his magic drawn by him. The monster was struck by Yugret's attack of the multiple deployments of the thunderbolt, which was a strong lightning discharge composed of 25 magic circles that would allow it to even move. But the monster suddenly manages to get out, leaving Yugret shocked as to how it managed to dodge such a strong blow, and thinks about how its concentration at the time of the attack. Ernest then yells out to Classy, who is ready to throw her attack of the arrows rain towards the monster, and Yorua supports by attacking the monster by teeing it up by the chain prison. And Yugret throws his attack, which was the quadruple attack deployment, when he takes a glance at the monster. He was surprised as to how it remained calm in such a situation. The moment Yugret was going to attack, he recalls a man shows up saying him that he wasn't using a correct way to attack the monster, and who then asks him whether he was interested in the magic, which was only known by 2 of the people of Gardena's academy, who were blessed with aptitude for such magic, where one was the creator and other was being Yugret. He then tries his magic of reflection, which Yorua recalls was the special magic that made Yugret best in the class. He then releases the magic, trying to completely eradicate the monster, and then Ernest throws his spear at the monster, managing to cut off its head. And after killing the monster together, they then appreciate each other for fighting of the monster together by using their magic accompanied by their other members. It was the time when Yugret was learning magic from the man who was getting trained to get a grip over it. It was Eldaz, who was teaching Yugret to manage his magic skills, and he excitedly yelled out as he managed to learn the skill. He thought him saying it almost took a day for him to learn it. Elders then smiled after saying it was the skill that would at least take a month to master. Yugret then was excited to learn about the next skill he was going to teach him, after which Eldaz suggested that they go fishing now, and that they would continue the training tomorrow, listening which he acts stubborn to learn the magic. Elders then appreciate Yugret as he had an innate gift of becoming an exceptional magician without him teaching Yugret. They then continued to do fishing in the river, and they had a lot of fun on their day. Yugret becomes sad upon learning that Eldaz is going to leave the royal capital, and asks him whether this is the last time it will be to see him. Eldaz then looks at Yugret and tells him not to become a court magician in the future, and those were the words said to Yugret before Eldaz left as a farewell, and then he disappeared. He then calls out his members, saying that he would become a court magician. Loki then approaches them, praising how incredible the group is, and points out Yugret, who was known to kill Hydra, who was a wizard who belonged to the Gardena court. Yugret then tells Loki that he is now a former court magician, which shocks Loki as to why he quit such a post from the Gardena court. Loki then asks Yorua if she could lend some more potions to him, as he had already used up all he was handed over by them. Ernest then asked as to how he handed them over, and asked about what happened to the other 2 he had. Loki then says that the other 2 might be still struggling harder with the floor boss. Kasha then points him out for him being good at provoking hate, and then Loki turns towards her smiling self, praising himself then at Ernest, and throws a splash of potion, teasing whether it is sufficient for him. Loki then sarcastically thanks Ernest, who then says to pay for the potion later as it was not free, and seeing them, Yugret and Yorua laugh as to how they were both fighting against each other. Kasha then asks Loki seriously to tell them about the other boss, and then Loki says that the boss was just like the first enemy, who seemed undead and born a jet black armored knight. And he then says that the physical attacks against it were useless, except they should have only made time to escape from it. Loki then hands over a weapon he had to Yugret, saying that he was good with weapons and states he could be the vanguard warrior. Yugret is surprised to see the weapon, which seems powerful. He then states that he was a support magician and he understood how Yugret's way of attack was, and tells him that if he was going to use the ancient relic to take down the higher level boss, he needed to use the weapon which was handed over by him, which was the Schwartz, the new weapon he would be using to fight the boss. Yorua then figures out and asks Loki whether he wants Yugret to be in the vanguard, to which Loki agrees by saying he would give Yugret the ancient relic, and instead of which he would not want him to use the magic other than it. Classic then questions Loki whether the magic of the ancient realm would be enough to fight against the undead, to which Loki says that he could not help such thing as he was the lover of the ex-Tarbag, and so says that he would be going to be treated a great deception from their side. From now he would be handling to deal with it, and grins, saying it was his turn to give quite a surprise from his side. Yugret then asks Loki whether he didn't want him to use the magic despite him having the ancient relic, which would be useful but not sufficient to fight against the undead unless he used other physical tactics. Ernest then points at Loki for saying Yugret wasn't ready, as if he seemed so confident like he knew Yugret. Yorua then figures out what Loki meant and says as if he wanted the enemy to think only Yugret was the one who used the sword against it. Loki then approves what Yorua said and tells Yugret that he only wanted him to fight with the sword until he gives the signal as a part of the plan, to which Yugret agrees. Loki then tells Classy to help her with her spell to use for teleportation. Loki was then glared by Classy and Ernest, where Loki assures he would go together as per the plan. Yugret then asks Yorua how much she trusts in Loki, to which she reveals that Loki was in command of the joint subjugation forces 2 years ago, and concludes by saying that she didn't trust him completely as she trusts Yugret. Yugret then calls Ernest, saying that he would now fight with a sword as it was been a while since he used it. Ernest was excited and he pats Yugret's head that he was out of practice, which would give him the advantage to fight more than him, and they then speak in a funnier manner, which leaves Yorua annoyed. Ernest then reminds Yugret of the rules, where the first one who fell would be the loser to get the punishment, to which both giggle as they are taking up a funny challenge. Loki then smiles at them and asks Classy how their friendship sustained despite being so many years, to which she says they have known each other for a long time. Loki then makes fun of Classy by addressing her as Classy-chan, and she grows furious, threatening that he will be killed if he calls her again. The same way all the members are teleported by the magic, and Yorua and Yugret are surprised as to how it leads them to the next floor. Loki then alerts them to prepare for the battle, and they arrange all the plans according to the items. At the kingdom of Grafana, royal capital, the crown prince was yelling at the sorcerer, blaming him was lying regarding the situation, which left him wounded. He blamed his condition was due to the false curse of Yugret, to which the sorcerer denied the fact, leaving the prince angry. Then he tells the prince that it would be difficult for him to reach the floors in which no magic could be used, as there was a barrier that cancelled all the magic. The prince then thinks about Yogurt, who used to use such support magic, to which the sorcerer points out Yugret, who was one of the students from the group who reached the 68th floor, to which the prince grins upon getting revenge against him.